My new wife's son slapped me and my wife just laughed. He's only playing. My wife's daughter sneered. Go on, hit him back if you dare. I smiled gently and said, it's all right. That night, I quietly canceled their private school funding. The next morning, one letter from the school left them all speechless. Look, I'm not saying I saw it coming, but I definitely should have. When you marry a woman with 2 kids who already look at you like you're a temporary inconvenience between their mother and her credit card, you kind of sign up for a certain level of disrespect. But getting full-on pimp slapped by a 10-year-old on a Saturday afternoon, that wasn't in the brochure. It was one of those lazy Saturdays where the universe gives you exactly what you need. Sunshine streaming through the windows, a fresh pot of coffee brewing in the kitchen, and absolutely zero plans beyond finding the TV remote. And maybe, just maybe, watching a game in peace. The kind of day where you think, yeah, this marriage thing might actually work out. Spoiler alert, it wasn't working out. I was standing in the living room, minding my own business, trying to locate said remote among the hurricane of throw pillows Rachel had strategically placed everywhere like landmines of home decor. That's when Milo decided to walk up to me with the confidence of a Wall Street trader who just made his first million and smack. His little hand connected with my face so hard I swear I heard my ancestors gasp. For a second, everything went silent. The ceiling fan actually seemed to slow down. Like even it was thinking, did this kid just? My cheek was burning. Not just from the impact, but from the sheer audacity of it all. This wasn't a playful tap. This was a statement. This was Milo establishing dominance in a household where I apparently ranked somewhere between the family dog and the decorative vase nobody likes but keeps anyway. I stood there frozen, my brain trying to process what just happened while my face pulsed with the kind of heat you only feel when you're either extremely embarrassed or about to commit a felony. Milo stood in front of me, arms crossed, with this smirk that said he'd done it before and gotten away with it, which, let's be real, he probably had. Then came Rachel's voice from the kitchen doorway. And I swear to God, she was laughing. Not a nervous, oh no, my child just assaulted my husband laugh, but a genuine full-throated cackle like she just watched the funniest YouTube video of her life. He's only playing, she said, waving her hand dismissively like I was being dramatic for having a functioning nervous system. That registered pain. Only playing, right? Because nothing says playful bonding like getting smacked across the face by someone who still needs help tying his shoes. I looked at Rachel standing there in her yoga pants and oversized sweater, wine glass already in hand, even though it was barely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I realized something profound. I'd married someone who thought assault was adorable when her kid did it. Before I could respond, not that I was planning to, because what do you even say in that moment, Harper materialized on the couch like some teenage specter of judgment. She was leaning against the armrest with her phone in one hand, that signature Gen Z smirk plastered across her face. Go on, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of casual cruelty only 14-year-olds can master. Hit him back if you dare. Oh, so now it was a challenge, a test. Hit the kid and prove I'm some kind of monster, or don't hit the kid and prove I'm a pushover. Classic no-win scenario, like choosing between 2 expired milk cartons. Harper's eyes gleamed with anticipation, probably already drafting the TikTok caption, Step loses his mind. LOL #drama #toxic #family content. I looked at Milo, then at Harper, then at Rachel, who was still smiling like we were in the middle of some heartwarming sitcom moment instead of what was clearly a hostage situation disguised as family bonding. My cheek throbbed. My pride was doing that thing where it packs its bags and checks Airbnb prices in different cities. Every fiber of my being wanted to say something, do something, anything to establish that hitting your stepfather is, not okay. But here's the thing about moments like these. You have 2 choices. You can explode right then and there. Become the bad guy. Give them all the ammunition they need to paint you as the villain at the next family gathering. Or you can smile. You can stay calm. You can let them think they've won while you quietly plan something so calculated, so perfectly executed that by the time they realize what's happened, it's already too late. So, I smiled. Not a big smile, not a fake one either. Just this small knowing curve of the lips that probably looks slightly unhinged if I'm being honest. It's all right, I said, my voice steady and calm, like I was discussing the weather instead of the fact that I'd just been physically assaulted in my own living room by someone who still believed in Santa Claus last year. The room shifted. I could feel it. Rachel's laugh caught in her throat. Harper's smirk faltered for just a second. Even Milo looked slightly uncertain, like maybe, just maybe, he poked the wrong bear. Because here's what they didn't understand. Nothing terrifies people more than a man who stays calm when he should be losing his mind. It's that eerie serial killer documentary energy that makes people wonder what you're thinking, What you're planning, what box you're checking off in your mental revenge spreadsheet. I walked past all three of them, heading toward the kitchen to pour myself more coffee. The only honest relationship I had left in this house. Behind me, I heard Rachel clear her throat. That nervous little sound she makes when she realizes she might have miscalculated something. Harper went back to her phone, but quieter now. Milo just stood there, probably wondering why his greatest hit didn't get the reaction he wanted. As I stood at the counter pouring French roast into my favorite mug, the one that said "World's Okayest Stepdad" that Rachel bought as a joke, but I kept as evidence. I caught my reflection in the microwave door. My cheek was still red, my jaw tight. But my eyes had that look that you just activated my trap card look. They wanted to play. Fine, we'd play. But this game was going to be played by my rules now. And trust me, I've been studying the playbook for 2 years. Every dismissive comment, every eye roll. Every time Rachel chose her kids' bad behavior over basic respect, I'd been taking notes, mental notes, the kind that don't forget. I took a sip of my coffee, let the bitterness ground me, and smiled again, this time to myself. Because revenge isn't about acting immediately. It's about timing. It's about patience. It's about letting them get comfortable, letting them think you're broken in, letting them believe you'll just take it forever. And then when they least expect it, you remind them that the quiet ones, we're not quiet because we're weak. We're quiet because we're planning. Game on, family. Game on. That evening rolled around with all the grace of a garbage truck at 5 o'clock in the morning. You'd think after your kid slaps your husband across the face, there'd be some kind of family meeting, maybe an apology, perhaps even a consequence that didn't involve everyone pretending it was just another hilarious Tuesday. But no, Rachel acted like absolutely nothing had happened, which I was starting to realize was her superpower, the ability to erase reality with sheer willpower and Chardonnay. She emerged from our bedroom around 6 o'clock, freshly showered, hair blown out like she was about to film a shampoo commercial, wearing that cream-colored sweater she reserved for feeling myself days. She floated into the kitchen where I was already prepping dinner because apparently somewhere between "I do" and "your son assaulted me." I'd become the household chef. She poured herself a generous glass of white wine, the kind that costs $30 a bottle and tastes like regret with hints of oak, and settled onto one of our counter stools like a talk show host about to deliver a monologue. "You know what I love about Milo?" she said, swirling her wine like she was at a vineyard in Napa instead of our suburban kitchen that still smelled like the garlic I was mincing. She didn't wait for me to answer. This wasn't actually a conversation, just a one-woman show where I played the captive audience. His confidence. He's so confident for his age. Most kids are timid, you know, but not Milo. He just goes for what he wants. I paused mid-chop, my knife hovering over the cutting board, and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was dead serious. In Rachel's mind, her 10-year-old son smacking a grown man wasn't assault. It was leadership potential. It was confidence. It was the kind of go-getter attitude that Silicon Valley brothers put on their LinkedIn profiles right before their startups tank. And they move back in with their parents. "Yeah," I said slowly, resuming my chopping with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. Nothing says confidence like hitting someone who's trying to find the TV remote. Real CEO energy there. The sarcasm flew right over her head like a paper airplane in a hurricane. She just nodded enthusiastically, took another sip of her wine, and launched into this story about how Milo had apparently dominated at his soccer practice last week. Dominated like he was a UFC fighter instead of a kid who still couldn't remember to flush the toilet half the time. Harper wandered in around that point, earbuds in, phone glued to her hand like it was a vital organ she'd die without. She was wearing ripped jeans that probably cost more than my car payment and a crop top that said "Icon" in glittery letters. She grabbed a LaCroix from the fridge because God forbid anyone in this house drink regular water like a peasant, and leaned against the counter, scrolling through what I assumed was either TikTok or evidence of our society's decline. Probably both. Rachel turned to her with that mom voice that's trying way too hard to be both authoritative and cool. "Harper, sweetie, can you please be nice to your stepdad? He does a lot for this family." Harper's eyes didn't leave her phone, but she managed to roll them so hard I'm pretty sure I heard them complete a full rotation. It was like watching a skateboard trick, but with teenage disdain. "Sure, Mom, whatever." They whatever hung in the air like a fart at a funeral, acknowledged by no one, but felt by everyone. Rachel just smiled, apparently satisfied that she'd addressed the issue of basic human respect with all the effectiveness of a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, and went back to her wine. I turned back to the stove, stirring the pasta sauce I'd been working on for the better part of an hour. Homemade marinara because Rachel liked to tell her book club friends that I was such an amazing cook, which really meant he does all the cooking so I don't have to. Stepdad/chef/oceanal punching bag. That was my official title in this household, though it never appeared on any Mother's Day cards or family photos Rachel posted on Instagram with captions like #blessed, #family love, #grateful. Milo thundered down the stairs like a baby elephant having an existential crisis, his tablet blaring some YouTube video where people screamed at each other over video games. He threw himself into a chair at the dinner table, didn't wash his hands. I watched him not wash them, and immediately started complaining that he was starving like he'd just crossed the Sahara instead of spending the last 3 hours in his room playing Fortnite. Dinner was the usual circus. I served everyone while Rachel documented it for her Instagram story. Family dinner nights are everything. Spaghetti red heart sparkles, complete with that Valencia filter that made our mediocre kitchen look like something out of a home design magazine. Every time I passed her to refill the bread basket or grab more Parmesan, I caught her checking her reflection in her phone camera, adjusting her hair, making sure her angles were right. She took 14 photos of her pasta before she actually ate any of it. 14. I counted because at this point, documenting the insanity was the only thing keeping me sane. Milo ate like he was auditioning for a nature documentary. Specifically, the part where they show wild animals feeding, mouth open, food visible, sounds that shouldn't come from humans. It was like National Geographic Zoo at dinner edition, and I was both the zookeeper and the guy cleaning up after the exhibits. He talked with his mouth full, sprayed pasta sauce on the table, and when Rachel gently suggested he close his mouth while chewing, he just shrugged and kept going like she'd suggested he try breathing underwater. Harper picked at her food with the enthusiasm of someone being forced to eat cafeteria mystery meat, complained that the sauce was too tomatoey, which, yeah, that's generally how tomato sauce works, and spent most of dinner typing furiously on her phone. When Rachel asked who she was texting, Harper responded with, "Nobody." In that tone, that very clearly meant, everybody, and also, it's none of your business. But I'm going to make you feel guilty for asking. I sat there eating my own cooking, watching this dysfunctional dinner theater unfold like I was a guest star in a sitcom that had definitely jumped the shark. Rachel laughed at something Milo said. Something about another kid at school being dumb for not having the latest iPhone. And I realized something profound and slightly terrifying. She genuinely didn't see anything wrong with any of this. The slap from this afternoon already forgotten. The casual disrespect. Just kids being kids. The fact that I was basically an unpaid servant who occasionally got to sleep in the master bedroom. That was just marriage, baby. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about reaching your breaking point. It doesn't always feel like breaking. Sometimes it feels like clarity. Like someone just turned on the lights in a room you'd been stumbling through in the dark for years. As I sat there chewing my pasta and watching my wife take her 15th food photo while her son ate like a wood chipper and her daughter radioed her complaints to the International Tribunal of Teenage Injustice, I wasn't angry. I was inspired. There's something about being slapped by a child while your wife claps and calls it confidence that awakens a very specific type of calm vengeance. Not the hot, explosive kind where you flip tables and storm out. No, this was the cold, calculated kind. The kind where you smile and nod and keep cooking dinner while your brain starts running numbers, checking accounts, and reviewing exactly where your money goes every month. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand, probably feeling generous after her second glass of wine. "Thank you for dinner, babe. You're the best." I squeezed back and smiled. Anything for family. And I meant it. I was about to do something very special for this family. And after Rachel had tucked Milo in while somehow making it sound like a heroic act worthy of a medal. And after Harper had locked herself in her room to do whatever teenagers do when they're definitely not doing homework. The house finally settled into something resembling peace. That blessed sacred silence that only comes when everyone else is unconscious and you can finally hear yourself think without someone asking you to pass the remote or complaining that the Wi-Fi is buffering. I grabbed my lukewarm coffee, my third cup of the day, because at this point, caffeine wasn't a beverage choice. It was a survival strategy, and headed to my home office. And when I say office, I'm being extremely generous. It was really just a converted coat closet that Rachel had let me have when we moved in together, like she was the landlord granting me a favor instead of my wife sharing a home we were both supposedly living in as equals. But hey, it was mine. My one corner of sanity in a house that felt increasingly like a reality show I never auditioned for. The room was barely big enough for a desk, a chair that squeaked whenever I shifted my weight, and a bookshelf that held a combination of financial planning books. I'd actually read and decorative novels Rachel had bought at Target to make it look sophisticated. There was also a plant on the corner of my desk, some leafy thing that I couldn't remember the name of, but was pretty sure was on life support. Its leaves were brown on the edges, drooping like it had given up on photosynthesis, and was just waiting for the sweet release of the compost bin. Honestly, same, buddy. Same. I settled into my chair, which greeted me with its usual groan of protest, and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated my face in that unflattering blue glow that makes everyone look like they're either about to hack into the Pentagon or watch their 5th hour of Netflix. For a moment, I just sat there staring at my desktop background. A photo from our honeymoon in Costa Rica, back when Rachel still laughed at my jokes and her kids were theoretically someone else's problem for a week. We looked happy in that photo, tanned, smiling, holding tropical drinks with little umbrellas. That guy in the photo had no idea what was coming. Poor bastard. I clicked open my banking app because nothing says romantic Saturday night like reviewing your financial hemorrhaging in a closet. The login screen appeared. I typed in my password, Rachel Love 2023, because I'd set it up when I was still optimistic and hadn't yet learned that love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes it just empties your checking account. And waited for my accounts to load. There it was. My checking account, my savings account, and the credit card I'd gotten specifically for family expenses, which really meant expenses for Rachel's family that she somehow never had cash for when the bills came. I clicked on the Scheduled Payments tab, and there it was, sitting there like a ticking time bomb of financial responsibility. The recurring payment for Milo and Harper's private school tuition. St. Augustine Academy, the best school in the district, according to Rachel, the place where kids wore uniforms that cost more than my entire wardrobe, and parents drove Teslas to pick up like they were in a parade of insufferable wealth. Tuition was $28,000 per kid per year. That's $56,000 annually for those of you keeping score at home. $56,000 for 2 kids who couldn't be bothered to say thank you if their lives depended on it. For 2 years, 2 full years, I'd been quietly footing this bill. Not because Rachel couldn't contribute. She had her own income from her consulting business, which, as far as I could tell, involved her drinking coffee with other women who also called themselves consultants and occasionally posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn. But whenever tuition rolled around, she'd get this pained look on her face and talk about cash flow issues and how she'd totally get the next one, which we both knew was code for you're going to pay for this because if you don't, you're not a real man or a real father figure or whatever guilt trip works best today. And I'd paid it every semester like clockwork because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You support their kids. You invest in their future. You sacrifice your own financial goals so that Milo can attend a school where he learns Latin, but not basic manners. And Harper can network with other teenagers whose parents think a Honda Accord is what poor people drive. Rachel loved bragging about it. I'd heard her on the phone with her friends, her voice all sing-songy and proud. Oh yes, Milo absolutely loves St. Augustine's. The teachers are incredible and the facilities to die for. We're just so blessed. We're blessed. We like it was a team effort, like she'd done anything besides show up to parent-teacher conferences in designer jeans and nod approvingly while I signed the check. Never once, not once had she said, my husband pays for it. Or, we're lucky he's so generous. Or even, thank God for that guy in the closet office who works his ass off while my kids treat him like the help. Nope. Just we're blessed. Like divine intervention had opened the gates of private education instead of my direct deposit hitting every other Friday. I stared at that scheduled payment on my screen. Next installment due in 1 week, $5,200. That was the monthly payment plan I'd set up because dropping $28,000 all at once felt like getting punched in the kidney by a loan officer. My cursor hovered over the payment details and I felt this strange calm wash over me. The kind of calm you feel when you're about to make a decision that will absolutely cause chaos but feels cosmically correct. I could almost hear my late father's voice in my head. Dad had been a practical man, a plumber who'd built his business from nothing and taught me that respect was earned, not bought. He died 3 years ago right before I met Rachel. And sometimes I wondered what he'd say about this whole situation. I had a pretty good idea, actually. He'd probably look at me with those bushy eyebrows raised and say something like, son, the best revenge doesn't shout. It deducts. Dad was big on financial consequences. He believed that money talked louder than words. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was close your wallet and walk away. People don't change because you yell at them. He told me once while we were fixing a sink in some McMansion where the owner had spent more on bathroom fixtures than Dad made in a year. They change when their comfort gets disrupted. When the gravy train stops running, my cursor moved to the cancel recurring payment button. It was just sitting there red and inviting like the nuclear launch button, except instead of starting World War II, it would just start World War Me. 1 click, that's all it would take. 1 click to stop the financial bleeding. 1 click to introduce my stepkids to the concept of consequences. One click to remind Rachel that we're blessed because someone is actually doing the blessing and that someone is currently sitting in a closet at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night questioning every life choice that led to this moment. I thought about Milo's face this afternoon. That smirk right after he'd slapped me. I thought about Harper's challenge. Hit him back if you dare. I thought about Rachel's laugh. That dismissive, aren't kids adorable laugh that completely disregarded the fact that I was a human being with feelings and a face that still slightly hurt. I thought about dinner, about being the unpaid chef, an emotional support animal, an ATM, all rolled into one convenient stepdad package. And then I thought about that scheduled payment sitting there like a subscription to my own disrespect. $5,200 a month to ensure that two kids who didn't respect me could continue attending a school where they'd learn to disrespect me with better vocabulary. You're blessed. All right, I whispered to the empty room, my voice barely audible over the hum of my laptop fan about to be blessed with a lesson. I clicked the button. The screen asked me to confirm, "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Click. Payment canceled. Just like that. 2 years of financial martyrdom ended with a mouse click. No explosion, no dramatic music, just a simple confirmation message. And the sudden, beautiful lightness of knowing that next month that $5,200 would stay exactly where it belonged, in my account. Peace returned to my soul like a bird coming home to roost. I sat back in my squeaky chair, took a sip of my cold coffee, and smiled at my dying plant. "Buddy," I said to it. "I think we're both about to get better." Sunday morning arrived with all the subtlety of a marching band, which is to say, Rachel's alarm went off at 7:30 a.m. playing some acoustic indie song about finding yourself that made me want to find the snooze button and press it until next Tuesday. She bolted upright like she'd been electrocuted, immediately grabbed her phone because heaven forbid she missed any overnight notifications from people she hadn't talked to since high school, and announced to the ceiling, "It's breakfast content day." I should probably explain that Rachel had recently decided she was going to be an influencer. Not like a real influencer with actual followers or sponsorships or any measurable success, but the kind who posts inspirational quotes over pictures of her coffee and tags them with 47 hashtags, including #BossBabe, #Mernur, and my personal favorite #AuthenticLiving. Her Instagram bio read, "Mama, wife, wellness warrior, cherry blossom sparkles." Which was hilarious because the only battle she fought regularly was with the self-checkout at Target. This particular Sunday, she decided we were going to have a family breakfast moment that she could photograph for her 847 followers, most of whom were either her relatives, bots, or people who'd accidentally followed her back in 2019 and forgot to unfollow. She'd been planning this all week, which I knew because she'd made a Pinterest board titled Aesthetic Breakfast, and had made 3 separate trips to Home Goods to find the perfect rustic serving platter. By 8 a.m., she'd transformed our kitchen into what I can only describe as a Food Network fever dream. There were pancakes arranged in an artistic stack, fresh berries artfully scattered across the table like edible confetti, a picture of orange juice that caught the morning light just right, and those tiny glass bottles of maple syrup that cost $9 each and tasted exactly like the $4 stuff but looked better on camera. She'd even put flowers in a vase. Actual fresh flowers that she'd made me drive to the floors to get yesterday because apparently the flowers from the grocery store weren't authentic enough. She was wearing her designated casual influencer outfit. High-waisted jeans, a white t-shirt tucked in just so, and that denim apron she'd bought specifically for photos and had literally never used for actual cooking. Her hair was in a messy bun that had taken her 20 minutes to make look like it took 30 seconds. And she'd done the full makeup routine while claiming she was going for a natural no-makeup look. The result was that she looked ready for a magazine photo shoot about farmhouse living, which was ironic since the closest she'd ever been to a farm was the Whole Foods produce section. "Okay, everyone, gather around," she called out, her voice hitting that weird performative octave that people use when they're talking to both their family and their future audience simultaneously. "Let's get some great shots before the food gets cold." Milo came thundering down the stairs, wearing his pajamas inside out. I could see the tag flapping around in the back and sporting what I'm pretty sure was yesterday's syrup in his hair. Harper followed about 5 minutes later, looking like she'd just been exhumed from a tomb, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, her eyes barely open, and her phone already in her hand like it was surgically attached. "Harper, sweetie, can you maybe put on something with color?" Rachel asked, her smile tight as she frantically adjusted the flower vase for the 14th time. "And maybe brush your hair just for the photos." Harper looked at her mother like she'd suggested she donate a kidney. "Mom, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Nobody cares." "I care." Rachel chirped, her influencer voice straining slightly. "And my followers care. We're sharing our beautiful family breakfast tradition." "We don't have a family breakfast tradition," Harper mumbled. But she was already trudging back upstairs, probably to change into the minimum acceptable outfit that would get her mother off her back while still communicating maximum teenage rebellion. I stood at the counter pouring myself coffee, real coffee, not the decorative kind Rachel had positioned near the flowers, and watched this circus unfold with the detached amusement of someone who just canceled $56,000 in annual payments and was now essentially watching previews for the movie that was about to start. Rachel positioned her phone on the tripod she bought specifically for these moments. Okay, everyone smile. Natural smiles like we're happy to be together. Milo immediately made a face like he was being tortured. Harper returned wearing a slightly different hoodie that was still gray and still communicated that she'd rather be literally anywhere else. Rachel snapped about 30 photos in rapid succession. Each one probably indistinguishable from the last, while I stood slightly to the side, coffee in hand, waiting for this performance to end so I could actually eat. Perfect. Okay, now let's do a candid one where everyone's laughing. At what? Harper asked, her tone suggesting that she found nothing in the observable universe remotely funny. Just laugh. Pretend something's funny. We all fake laughed. It sounded like a group of hostages trying to convince their captors they were having a good time. Rachel checked the photos, frowned, deleted half of them, and made us do it again and again. By the fourth take, even Milo looked tired, which was saying something because that kid had the energy of a squirrel that had just discovered energy drinks. Finally, we were allowed to actually sit down and eat. Milo immediately grabbed the syrup bottle and proceeded to drown his pancakes like he was trying to create a maple swimming pool. Harper picked at her berries with the enthusiasm of someone defusing a bomb. Rachel was already editing photos on her phone, applying filters that made our kitchen look like it existed in some sun-drenched dimension where families were actually happy and nobody's stepson had committed assault less than 24 hours ago. I cut into my pancakes, which were actually pretty good because I'd made the batter yesterday while Rachel was planning her phone angles and savored the quiet chaos. This was my last breakfast watching them take all of this for granted. The expensive organic berries, the fancy syrup, the whole performative perfection of it all because that tuition money I just freed up, that was going to change some things around here. Milo, in true Milo fashion, was eating like he was training for a competitive sport where table manners were explicitly forbidden, mouth open, chewing loudly, occasionally making sound effects. At one point, he flung syrup at the dog. We had a golden retriever named Biscuit, who Rachel had gotten during her "I need something to love me unconditionally" phase, and the dog, being a dog, happily licked it off the floor. Milo, buddy, maybe try to keep the syrup on your plate. Rachel suggested absently, not looking up from her phone where she was probably writing a caption about cherishing simple moments or some other inspirational garbage. Harper, meanwhile, was complaining about the Wi-Fi. Oh my god, this internet is so slow. Like, slower than poor people's connections. I can't even load Instagram. How am I supposed to exist like this? I paused mid-chew. Slower than poor people's connections. That's what she said. This 14-year-old who'd never paid a bill in her life, never worried about where her next meal was coming from, never had to choose between wants and needs, just casually threw out class's commentary while eating $20 berries on a Sunday morning. I set down my fork carefully and took a sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness ground me. You might want to enjoy that school breakfast while you can, I muttered. Just loud enough to technically be heard, but quiet enough that it could be missed. Nobody noticed. Rachel was typing furiously on her phone, probably responding to the 3 people who'd already liked her breakfast post. Harper was aggressively refreshing her Instagram feed like her life depended on it. Milo was seeing how many pancake pieces he could stuff in his mouth at once, because why not turn breakfast into a choking hazard? Rachel suddenly looked up from her phone and smiled at me. One of those warm, affectionate smiles that reminded me why I'd fallen for her in the first place. Back before I realized that the woman I'd dated and the woman I'd married were 2 different people operating under the same name, she got up, walked over, and kissed my cheek. The same cheek her son had slapped yesterday, which added a layer of irony so thick you could cut it with a knife. "You're so quiet these days," she said sweetly, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Everything okay?" I looked up at her. This woman who'd laughed when her kid hit me, who was currently more concerned with Instagram likes than actual family connection, who thought we're blessed, was an acceptable substitute for, "Thank you for paying for everything." I smiled back, the kind of smile that probably looked genuine if you weren't paying attention, but had undertones that could sink a ship. "Oh, I'm just reflecting," I replied, taking another sip of my coffee like a villain mid-plot, which, let's be honest, I kind of was at this point. She patted my shoulder, seemingly satisfied with that non-answer, and went back to her phone to add more hashtags, probably #family #blessed #gratitude, completely unaware that she was about to learn the actual definition of those words. If sarcasm burned calories, I'd be shredded by now. Hell, I'd be a skeleton. I'd be so fit that personal trainers would ask me for tips. But instead, I just sat there finishing my pancakes, watching my wife curate our fake perfect life for strangers on the internet while her kids embodied everything wrong with entitled youth. The bomb was ticking. They just couldn't hear it yet, but they would. Oh, they definitely would. The next few days pass like that awkward silence after someone tells a joke that absolutely bombs. You know something's wrong. The tension is there, but everyone's pretending everything's fine while internally screaming. Except in this case, I was the only one who knew the punchline was coming. And let me tell you, the anticipation was delicious. I'd slipped into what I can only describe as performance mode. I became the obedient husband, the stepfather who tries, the guy who does everything without complaint. I cooked dinners like I was auditioning for a cooking show nobody asked for. I did the laundry, folded it with those neat little military corners Rachel loved, and even separated the darks from the lights like I actually cared whether Milo's soccer jersey stayed vibrant. I took out the trash before it was full, unloaded the dishwasher without being asked, and even cleaned the bathroom, including that weird mildew spot behind the toilet that everyone pretended didn't exist. Rachel ate it up. "You've been so helpful lately," she said one evening while I was scrubbing a pan she'd left soaking in the sink for 3 days, which is code for "I'm never cleaning this." "Good luck." She wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "I feel like we're really in a good place right now." I smiled at the soapy water. "Yeah, babe. Really good place." What I didn't say was that the good place she was feeling was actually the eye of the hurricane. That deceptive calm right before everything goes sideways and people start checking their insurance policies. But why ruin the moment? Let her enjoy it. Let them all enjoy it. The school's accounting office was busy printing a very special letter right now. And that letter was going to arrive in a neat little white envelope with the St. Augustine Academy crest on it. And when it did, this good place was going to become a war zone. Tuesday evening, Rachel's mother stopped by because apparently my life wasn't complicated enough without adding Brenda to the mix. Brenda was one of those women who'd aged into that specific brand of wealthy suburban grandmother. Perfectly highlighted hair, expensive athleisure wear that she'd never actually exercised in. And opinions about everything that she delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything ever, even though she was wrong about most things constantly. She arrived carrying a Whole Foods bag full of organic snacks for her babies, meaning Milo and Harper, not Rachel and definitely not me, and wearing yoga pants that cost more than my car insurance. She swept into our house like she owned it, which she kind of did in spirit since Rachel still called her for advice on everything from what color to paint the bathroom to whether Mercury being in retrograde was why the Wi-Fi was slow. "Oh, there's my favorite son-in-law," Brenda announced. Even though I was her only son-in-law, which made the superlative pretty meaningless. She air-kissed both my cheeks. I don't know when that became a thing we did, but apparently it was, and then immediately turned to Rachel. "Where are my angels?" The angels were currently upstairs. Milo was playing video games at a volume that suggested he was trying to communicate with aircraft. And Harper was doing whatever Harper did, which probably involved taking 47 selfies and complaining about how the lighting in her room wasn't Instagram worthy. Rachel called them down and they came stampeding like someone had announced free iPhones. Brenda showered them with attention and organic granola bars that were probably gluten-free, dairy-free, joy-free, and tasted like cardboard that had been blessed by a wellness influencer. The kids grabbed their treats and immediately retreated back upstairs, their obligation to Grandma fulfilled for the week. We all settled in the living room, me on the couch, Rachel and Brenda on the love seat, because apparently they needed to be close enough to gossip in that stage whisper way that's meant to be heard. I was pretending to read something on my phone, but was actually just staring at the same email about a sale at Home Depot while listening to their conversation. "Rachel, honey, you look tired," Brenda said, which is grandmother code for, "You look terrible, but I'm going to say it nicely. Are you getting enough help around here?" Rachel glanced at me, and for a second, I thought she might actually acknowledge that I did literally everything around here except breathe for her, but no. Instead, she sighed dramatically and said, "Oh, you know how it is. The kids keep me so busy. Milo has soccer and tutoring. Harper's got her friend drama, and there's just so much to manage." Brenda nodded sympathetically like Rachel had just described surviving a natural disaster instead of having a pretty standard suburban existence where the biggest crisis was deciding which filter to use on Instagram. "You're such a saint dealing with all of that and raising them practically alone." I looked up from my phone. "Practically alone." Brenda turned to me with this patronizing smile that probably worked great on her bridge club, but made me want to test whether expensive yoga pants were flammable. "Oh, you know what I mean, dear. Single motherhood is so hard, even when there's a partner. You married a saint. You know that Rachel could have any man she wanted, and she chose you. You're very lucky. There it was. The reminder that I should be grateful that Rachel, in all her divorced with 2 kids, glory, had deigned to marry me, and I should wake up every day thanking my lucky stars that she'd settled for a guy who worked in it and didn't drive a BMW. Never mind that I'd walked into a ready-made family and immediately started bankrolling their lifestyle. Never mind that I'd put my own dreams of early retirement on hold to pay for a private school that taught Milo the Latin word for ungrateful, but not how to use basic manners. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Oh, I know exactly how lucky I am, Brenda. She beamed, completely missing the edge in my voice. Then she launched into this whole thing about how wonderful it was that I let Rachel's kids walk all over me. Except she phrased it differently. You're so patient with them. Not every man would be okay with his wife putting her children first, but you just let them be themselves, and that's beautiful. Really, you're a saint, too. Rachel laughed. Actually laughed and clinked her wine glass against her mother's like they just toasted something profound instead of casually insulting me. Mom's right. You're so easygoing. Most guys would have way more ego about things. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my beer. Domestic because God forbid I spend money on craft beer when there were private school tuitions to pay. Oh wait. Oh, Brenda, they're not walking, I said carefully, my voice light and conversational. They're sprinting. Both women laughed, thinking I was joking, making some self-deprecating comment about being overwhelmed by family life. They had no idea I was talking about the future, the very near future, where Milo and Harper would be sprinting to the principal's office at whatever public school ended up accepting them. Mid-semester, Brenda stayed for another excruciating hour, during which she managed to compliment Rachel 47 times, asked me twice what I did for work, like she forgot every time she saw me, and somehow work in 3 separate mentions of her friend Carol's son, who was a doctor. A doctor, in case I missed it. Because apparently every conversation with your mother-in-law needs to include a reminder that you're not living up to some imaginary standard set by Carol's imaginary perfect son. After she finally left, taking her expensive yoga pants and her backhanded compliments with her, the house settled back into its usual chaos. Harper emerged from her room to practice what she called her influencer walk in front of the hallway mirror. I watched from the kitchen as she strutted back and forth, phone in hand, filming herself from various angles like she was preparing for Fashion Week instead of just walking down a hallway in suburban America. Looking good, Harper, I called out. She glanced at me, surprised that I'd said anything. Thanks, she muttered, then went back to her video, probably already composing a caption about confidence and authenticity. Milo, meanwhile, decided that the living room was the perfect place for indoor soccer. Despite having an entire backyard and a bedroom the size of most people's apartments, he grabbed a foam ball and started dribbling it around the furniture like he was Messi training for the World Cup. I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich, turkey and Swiss, nothing fancy, just trying to eat in peace when I heard it crash. That specific sound of something expensive hitting the floor and losing the fight. I walked into the living room to find my reading lamp. The one I bought myself last Christmas, the one with the brass base that actually looked decent in pieces on the floor. The bulb had shattered, the shade was dented, and Milo was standing there with his ball, looking about as remorseful as a cat who'd just knocked over a vase on purpose. Oops, he said, not making eye contact. Rachel came down the stairs, took one look at the scene, and shrugged. He's expressive. Expressive? My lamp was in pieces because her son couldn't grasp the revolutionary concept of don't play ball in the house. And her response was that he's expressive. I stared at the broken lamp, then at Milo, then at Rachel, and something clicked, not anger. I was past anger. This was something else. This was clarity. Yes, I said slowly, bending down to pick up a piece of broken glass. So was Napoleon. Didn't end well either. Rachel blinked at me. What? Nothing, babe. I'll clean this up. And I did. I cleaned up the broken lamp, swept up the glass, and threw it all away while Milo went back upstairs unpunished. And Rachel went back to whatever she was doing, which was probably posting about family values on Facebook. That night, lying in bed while Rachel scrolled through her phone, I smiled at the ceiling. The envelope was coming. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. But it was coming. And when it did, we'd see how expressive everyone felt when their private school paradise came crashing down just like my lamp. Except unlike the lamp, I had no intention of cleaning up that mess. Saturday rolled around again, and I woke up with what I can only describe as misplaced optimism. You know that feeling when you think maybe, just maybe, you can fix something that's clearly beyond repair? Like when your check engine light's been on for 6 months and you think adding premium gas might solve it. That was me lying in bed at 7 a.m. convincing myself that I could bond with Milo. That maybe despite all evidence to the contrary, there was a decent kid under all that entitlement and violence. Rachel was still asleep, her face mask half peeled off and stuck to the pillow. One of those $20 Korean beauty masks she bought in bulk from some website that promised eternal youth, but mostly just made her look like a serial killer's victim. Harper was probably in her room, either sleeping or pretending to sleep, so nobody would ask her to do anything productive. And Milo was probably already awake, plotting his next assault or figuring out what household item he could destroy next. I decided I was going to try something radical, actual bonding. Revolutionary, I know. I'd bake cookies with the kid. Everyone loves cookies, right? It's basically impossible to be a terrible person while making chocolate chip cookies. That's just science. Or at least that's what I told myself while putting on sweatpants and heading downstairs to our kitchen that was definitely not equipped for a baking show, but would have to do. I got out all the ingredients: flour, sugar, butter, chocolate chips, the whole 9 yards. I even found Rachel's fancy vanilla extract that she'd bought at some artisan market and never used because actually cooking would interfere with her photographing food she didn't make. I was measuring out flour when Milo appeared in the doorway looking suspicious like I just offered him candy from a van. "Hey champ," I said, going for enthusiastic, but probably landing somewhere around desperate used car salesman. "Want to bake some cookies with me?" He stood there in his pajamas. Spider-Man ones that were getting too small, but Rachel kept making him wear because she thought they were adorable and gave me this look like I just asked him to donate a kidney. His hair was sticking up in every direction. He had sleep crust in the corners of his eyes and he was holding his tablet like it was a security blanket. "Cookies," he said, his voice thick with skepticism that seemed way too advanced for a 10-year-old. "Yeah, you know the round things that taste good. We mix stuff, put it in the oven, try not to burn down the house." Classic Saturday activity, he shrugged, which in preteen communication could mean anything from sure. Why not to I'd rather eat glass, but I'm bored enough to consider this. I decided to interpret it optimistically and gestured to the counter. "Cool. Come on over. You can crack the eggs." He shuffled over, set his tablet down, but kept it in view because, God forbid he disconnect from the digital world for more than 30 seconds, and picked up an egg like it was a live grenade. To his credit, he actually managed to crack it without getting shell everywhere, which was more than I'd expected, honestly. We worked in relative silence for a few minutes. I measured. He dumped things into the bowl. I mixed. He watched. It was almost peaceful. Almost the kind of almost that makes you forget you're in a situation comedy written by someone who hates you. "Why are we doing this?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet like a knife through butter. Or in this case, like a spatula through cookie dough. "What do you mean this?" He gestured vaguely at the mixing bowl. "The cookie thing. Mom says you only do stuff like this because you're bored and old." I stopped mid-stir. The spatula frozen in the bowl. My brain doing that thing where it tries to process something so casually cruel that it takes a second to register. "She said that." "Huh?" "Yeah." He said it so matter-of-factly like he was telling me the weather forecast or what he had for lunch. No malice, no awareness that he just dropped a conversational bomb. Just a kid repeating what his mom said, probably word for word with all the innocent cruelty of someone who doesn't understand the weight of what they're saying. I resumed stirring, focusing on the dough because looking at Milo right then would have revealed something on my face that I wasn't ready to show. "Well," I said carefully, keeping my voice light. "Boredom's cheaper than therapy." He grinned at that. Actually grinned like I'd said something funny instead of something that was 50% joke and 50% cry for help. We kept mixing, adding the chocolate chips, forming the dough into little balls, and placing them on the cookie sheet. He was actually getting into it. His tongue sticking out in concentration as he tried to make each ball the perfect size. "These are going to be good," he said. And for a second, just a second, he sounded like a normal kid, excited about cookies, not thinking about iPads or video games or slapping people. Just a kid who wanted cookies. Then he said it. "Mom says, you don't have real money, just savings." The cookie dough ball I was holding squished between my fingers. Not on purpose. My hand just clenched involuntarily. Muscle memory from every time someone said something so stunningly offensive that your body reacts before your brain can catch up. I looked down at the dough oozing between my knuckles and thought about how this was probably a metaphor for my life right now. I carefully shaped the dough back into a ball, placed it on the sheet, and wiped my hands on a towel. "Is that right?" "Uh-huh." She was talking to Grandma on the phone. Said, "You're good at saving, but you're not like rich. Not like Harper's real dad was." And there it was, the cherry on top of the sarcastic sundae. Not only was I apparently boring, old, and financially inadequate, but I was being compared to Rachel's ex-husband, the guy who cheated on her with his dental hygienist and then moved to Arizona without paying child support for 2 years. That guy, I was being unfavorably compared to that guy because apparently he'd had money before he decided that supporting his children was optional. I looked at the cookie dough, then at Milo, who was completely oblivious to the fact that he just nuked any remaining goodwill I might have had toward this family. He was just standing there licking chocolate chips off his fingers, waiting for me to respond like he'd commented on the weather instead of casually destroying my dignity in our kitchen on a Saturday morning. "Well," I said, sliding the cookie sheet into the oven and setting the timer. "Your mom's right about one thing. I do have savings. And you know what's great about savings, Milo?" He looked up at me, curious. "What? You can choose what to do with them." He nodded like this was some profound wisdom I was sharing, not a thinly veiled threat about his entire future. "Cool." We stood there for a moment, the oven warming up, filling the kitchen with that promise of baked goods that almost made everything seem normal. Almost. Milo grabbed his tablet and started playing some game where cartoon characters screamed at each other. I leaned against the counter and watched him. This kid who had no idea that his entire life was about to change because his mother couldn't keep her mouth shut about finances and because he'd been raised to think that insulting people was just casual conversation. The timer had 12 minutes on it. In 12 minutes, we'd have cookies. And in probably less than 12 business days, we'd have a crisis when that letter from St. Augustine Academy arrived. The math was all coming together beautifully, like a recipe for disaster that I'd followed to perfection. "You know what, buddy?" I said, watching him tap away at his tablet, completely absorbed in his digital world, completely unaware of the real-world consequences that were baking just as surely as those cookies. "What?" he mumbled, not looking up. "You're about to learn what happens when savings stops saving you." He didn't hear me. Or maybe he did and didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. The oven timer was counting down. The cookies were baking. And somewhere in a school administrative office, a letter with our name on it was waiting to be mailed. When the timer dinged, we pulled out perfect chocolate chip cookies. Golden brown gooey in the center, exactly the way they should be. Milo ate 3 of them right away, declared them pretty good, and then went back upstairs with his tablet, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the rest of the batch and my thoughts. I ate a cookie. It was delicious. Perfectly balanced sweetness, just enough salt, chocolate chips in every bite. I'd nailed the recipe. Too bad I couldn't say the same about this family. But hey, at least the cookies turned out right. That was one more success than this marriage was going to have once that envelope arrived. I smiled at the cooling rack full of cookies and whispered to myself, "Buddy, you're about to learn what happens when savings stop saving you." The house was quiet except for the sound of video games upstairs and my own breathing. The calm before the storm tastes a lot like chocolate chip cookies. Apparently, who knew? It was a Thursday. One of those perfect Thursday mornings that tricks you into thinking the universe might actually be on your side for once. The sun was doing that thing where it streams through the windows at just the right angle, making everything look like a home decor commercial. Birds were chirping outside like they'd been hired by Disney. The smell of pancakes was drifting up from the kitchen where Rachel was doing her morning routine. And for a brief delusional moment, you could almost forget that you lived in a house where respect went to die. I was upstairs getting dressed for work. Business casual, which is corporate speak for we don't respect you enough to let you wear jeans, but we also don't respect you enough to call it professional attire. When I heard it, the mail truck, that distinctive rumble of the USPS vehicle that delivers everything from credit card offers to divorce papers, too. In this case, karmic justice wrapped in a white envelope. My heart did this weird skip thing. Not a heart attack skip, more like a here we go skip. The kind of anticipatory flutter you get right before a roller coaster drops or right before you hit send on an email you know is going to cause chaos. I finished buttoning my shirt, took my time with my tie, navy blue with thin silver stripes, very professional, very I'm a guy who makes calculated decisions, and headed downstairs. Rachel was in full morning mode, which meant she was simultaneously making breakfast, checking her phone, and planning her day out loud to nobody in particular. She was wearing leggings and an oversized sweatshirt that said Mama Bear and rhinestones because apparently that was a personality trait. Now, her hair was in a top knot. She had her glasses on instead of contacts, and she was flipping pancakes with one hand while scrolling through Instagram with the other. A multitasking feat that would be impressive if it wasn't so depressing. "Morning, babe," she called out when she saw me. Her voice all sing-songy like we were in a sitcom where everyone loved each other and nobody was secretly plotting financial revenge. "Pancakes are almost ready." I'm trying that new recipe I found on Pinterest. You know, the one with the knock knock the mailman right on schedule. Beautiful, punctual, government-employed mailman bringing the reckoning right to our doorstep. Oh, mail's here, Rachel said like this was notable instead of a daily occurrence. She set down her phone. Miracle and wiped her hands on a dish towel. Can you grab it, hon? My hands are all pancake. Why? Sure thing, I said. Probably a little too quickly with a little too much enthusiasm. I walked to the front door like a man on a mission because this was it. The moment I'd been waiting for since I clicked that cancel payment button in my closet office. Christmas morning for petty people. The Super Bowl of consequences. I opened the door and there it was. A neat stack of mail held together with a rubber band. Bills, junk, a catalog for furniture Rachel would look at and never buy. And right there, right on top, like it knew it was the star of the show, a crisp white envelope with the St. Augustine Academy crest embossed in gold on the corner. I grabbed the mail, closed the door, and took a deep breath. This was happening. This was actually happening. I walked back to the kitchen with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're holding a live grenade and everyone else thinks it's a gift basket. Anything good? Rachel asked, still focused on her pancakes, still completely oblivious to the fact that her entire morning, hell, her entire week was about to implode. Let's see, I said casually, flipping through the stack like I was checking baseball scores instead of holding the nuclear codes to our family dynamics. Bill, junk, more junk. Coupon for that pizza place you like. And I paused, holding up the St. Augustine envelope. Something from the school. Rachel glanced over, still not concerned. Why would she be? As far as she knew, everything was fine. The tuition was paid. Her kids were getting their elite education. Life was blessed. We were blessed. She was blessed for having married someone who quietly funded her children's future while she took credit. And her mother insulted me. Oh, must be the new terms update, she said cheerfully, plating the pancakes with the kind of care she usually reserved for Instagram photos. They always send those fancy letters. Probably about the spring fundraiser or something. Can you open it? Sure, I said, grabbing a knife from the counter. I slid it under the flap of the envelope, taking my time, savoring the moment like a fine wine or a perfectly cooked steak. The paper made that satisfying tearing sound as I pulled out the letter. Heavy card stock, official letterhead, the kind of paper that costs more than regular paper because it needs to communicate importance. I unfolded it slowly. Read the first line, then the second. My face remained completely neutral, which was an acting performance worthy of an Oscar because inside I was doing backflips. What's it say? Rachel asked, still not looking up, still arranging pancakes like she was competing in some breakfast Olympics. I cleared my throat. It's interesting. That got her attention. She looked up, spatula still in hand, her smile starting to falter around the edges. Interesting how well I said holding up the letter so I could read it properly. Really milked the moment. You know it says here, Dear Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, this letter is to inform you that we have not received payment for the fall semester tuition for students Milo Henderson and Harper Chun. As of today's date, your account is past due in the amount of $28,000 with an additional late fee of $500. Please remit payment immediately to avoid enrollment consequences. The kitchen went silent, like horror movie silent. The kind of silent where you can hear your own heartbeat and maybe someone's soul leaving their body. Rachel's spatula clattered onto the counter. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish trying to understand calculus. What? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I kept reading. Really committing to the performance now. It also says, failure to pay within 10 business days will result in the students being withdrawn from enrollment and their records being held until the balance is settled. I looked up at her, my expression perfectly neutral. That's weird. Weird? Her voice cracked like she'd been gargling gravel. She snatched the letter from my hands, her eyes scanning the page like maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. But no, there it was. Printed in official black ink on expensive card stock. Unpaid tuition notice in bold letters at the top. Her face went through about 17 different expressions in 5 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, panic, anger, more panic, maybe a brief stop at denial and then landing solidly on what I can only describe as barely contained hysteria. This has to be a mistake. This has to be we always pay on time. You always, she stopped, her brain clearly trying to connect dots that were suddenly appearing in her reality. Did you forget to pay the tuition? I leaned against the counter, picked up a piece of bacon from the plate she'd prepared, perfectly crispy, actually pretty good, and took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, Looked her dead in the eye with the kind of calm that serial killers probably have right before they explain their master plan. "No," I said simply. "I didn't forget." She blinked once, twice. Her brain was buffering, trying to load this new information. "You didn't forget?" "Nope." Then what happened? Why didn't they get the payment? Did the bank make a mistake? Did the automatic payment not go through? I set down the bacon, brushed off my hands, and delivered the line I'd been practicing in my head for weeks. "Rachel, there was no mistake." I canceled it. The words hung in the air like smoke from a building that was definitely absolutely 100% on fire. Rachel just stood there, the letter trembling in her hands, her eyes wide, her mouth forming words that weren't quite coming out yet. Upstairs, I heard movement. Harper's door opening. Milo's feet hitting the floor. They were coming down for breakfast, completely unaware that their world had just shifted on its axis. I took another piece of bacon, popped it in my mouth, and waited for the explosion. 3, 2, 1, you what? And there it was. The detonation I'd been waiting for. Rachel's voice hitting decibels that probably violated noise ordinances. Her face turning that specific shade of red that suggested her blood pressure was having its own personal crisis. Thursday morning, perfect sunshine, birds chirping, pancakes burning on the stove that Rachel had completely forgotten about. And me standing in the kitchen eating bacon, watching my carefully planned chaos unfold exactly as I designed it. Best Thursday ever. Rachel's face went through more color changes than a mood ring at a rave. Red to white to purple to some shade that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist in nature. Her hands were shaking so hard the letter was rattling like a tambourine. And I could actually see her trying to reboot her entire understanding of reality in real time. "You what?" she repeated, her voice strangled like she was being choked by her own disbelief. I picked up my coffee, still hot, still perfect, and took a leisurely sip before answering. "No rush. We had all morning." Well, I had all morning. Rachel had a crisis to manage. But that wasn't really my problem anymore, was it? "Cancelled," I repeated, my voice calm and even like I was explaining how to work the TV remote instead of detonating her entire worldview. "I cancelled the tuition payment. Turns out private education doesn't teach respect. So, I'm cutting the budget for entitlement." Her mouth opened and closed several times. If I didn't know better, I'd think she was practicing for a goldfish impression. You can't just, that's their education. That's their future." "Well," I said, setting down my coffee and straightening my tie. "Maybe their future should have included learning that actions have consequences. Or at the very least not slapping the guy who's paying 48 grand a year for their fancy uniforms and Latin classes. This is about the slap." Rachel's voice hit a pitch that probably shattered glass somewhere in the neighborhood. "Are you serious right now? You're ruining my children's education because Milo was playing around." "Playing around?" I nodded slowly like I was considering this. "Right. Is that what we're calling assault now? Playing around? Good to know. I'll make sure to tell the next guy who gets hit by a 10-year-old that it's all just fun and games." That's when Harper appeared at the bottom of the stairs still in her pajamas, designer once naturally. That probably cost more than some people's rent with her phone already recording because of course she was recording. This was prime TikTok content for her. Drama, family dysfunction, all the ingredients for going viral among other teenagers who thought therapy was just a meme. "What's going on?" Harper asked, but her tone suggested she already knew this was going to be good. Her thumb was hovering over her phone screen, ready to capture every moment of this domestic implosion. Rachel whirled on her, the letter still clutched in her hand like evidence at a crime scene. "Your stepfather," she spat the word like it was poison, "has decided to stop paying for your school. Both of you, you're being kicked out because he canceled the tuition." Harper's face went pale, like vampire pale, like all the blood just evacuated her body and filed for asylum somewhere else. Her phone nearly slipped from her hand. Nearly, but not quite, because teenagers would rather lose a limb than drop their phones. "What?" Harper shrieked. And there it was. That same frequency that Rachel had hit moments before. "Must be genetic. You can't do that. St. Augustine is my school. All my friends are there. You can't just." She turned to me, her eyes wild with panic and fury. "You ruined my life." I looked at her. Really looked at her. This 14-year-old who'd spent the last 2 years treating me like I was furniture that occasionally spoke. Who'd made snide comments about my clothes, my car, my existence, who challenged me to hit her brother after he'd assaulted me. This girl who thought Wi-Fi speed was a measure of social class and that poor people were somehow less human. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "The way you talk to someone who's just realized they're not the main character they thought they were. I didn't ruin it. I just pressed reality mode. Consider this a software update. This isn't funny. She was full-on yelling now, tears streaming down her face, probably already mentally composing the sob story she'd post later about her evil stepfather. Do you know what this means? Do you have any idea what it's like to be kicked out of private school? I'll have to go to public school with normal people. The horror, I said dryly. Imagine having to attend school with 90% of the American population. How will you survive? Milo appeared then, sleepy and confused, his hair sticking up like he'd been electrocuted. He was dragging his blanket behind him like Linus from Peanuts, his tablet tucked under his arm because, God forbid he go 30 seconds without it. He looked around at his mother's tear-streaked face, his sister's meltdown, and me standing there calmly drinking coffee like the house wasn't burning down around us. What's happening? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. For the first time since I'd known him, he actually looked like a kid instead of a tiny tyrant. Rachel tried to compose herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara in the process. Mo, baby, come here. She pulled him into a hug that he didn't seem to want, his arms pinned awkwardly at his sides. Your stepfather has made a very selfish decision that's going to affect your whole life. Milo looked at me over his mother's shoulder, his eyes confused, and for the first time actually scared. Did I do something bad? And there it was, the moment. The kid finally connecting dots that his brain hadn't been developed enough to connect before. The realization that maybe, just maybe, hitting people might have consequences, that maybe actions don't exist in a vacuum, that maybe the guy who'd been quietly funding his privileged life wasn't just an ATM with feelings that could be ignored. I set down my coffee, walked over to where he was standing, and knelt down, so we were eye level. Rachel tried to pull him away from me, but he stayed put, waiting for my answer. I looked at this kid, this entitled, spoiled, but ultimately just confused kid who'd been raised by a mother who thought confidence meant never having to say sorry. I smiled. Not a mean smile, not a vindictive one. Just soft, almost sad. No, kiddo, I said quietly. You didn't do something bad. You just showed me where the money shouldn't go. You showed me that paying for a fancy education doesn't mean anything if nobody's learning the most important lessons. What lessons? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Respect, gratitude, understanding that people aren't just walking wallets. I reached out and ruffled his hair gently. You'll learn those lessons now, though. Just maybe not in a building with marble floors and a Latin motto. Rachel yanked him away from me then, her face twisted with rage. Don't you dare act like you're teaching them anything. You're being petty. You're being cruel. This is about your ego, your pride, because you can't handle that my kids don't worship you. I stood up, brushed off my knees, and looked at my wife, this woman I'd married 2 years ago, thinking we'd build something together, only to discover I'd really just signed up to be a financial provider for a family that saw me as a resource, not a person. You're right about one thing, Rachel, I said, my voice steady and calm. This is about me. It's about me finally recognizing my worth. It's about me understanding that love shouldn't cost $56,000 a year. It's about me realizing that I've been enabling bad behavior by cushioning every consequence with my checkbook. You're impossible, she shouted, throwing the letter onto the counter where it landed next to the burning pancakes she'd completely forgotten about. Smoke was starting to rise from the pan, adding a literal smoky backdrop to this figurative dumpster fire. I walked over, turned off the stove, and moved the pan to a cool burner. Even in crisis, someone had to be the adult. Might as well be me. Actually, I said, turning back to face my family. This collection of people who'd shared my house but never really let me into their hearts. I'm finally possible. For the first time in this house, I'm actually possible. The real me. Not the doormat version. Not the ATM version. Not the guy who smiles while getting slapped and laughed at. Just me, the guy who's decided he's worth more than this. Harper had collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her phone like it could somehow save her from public school. Milo was clinging to Rachel, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Rachel was staring at me with something between hatred and disbelief, like I'd transformed into a stranger right in front of her eyes. Maybe I had. You'll regret this, Rachel said, her voice cold and hard now. You'll wake up tomorrow and realize what you've done and you'll try to fix it and it'll be too late. I picked up my briefcase. Yes, I still used a briefcase. Sue me and headed toward the door. I had work in an hour and surprisingly I was looking forward to it. The office drama would be a vacation compared to this. You're right, I said pausing at the doorway, looking back at the wreckage of our Thursday morning. I will wake up tomorrow and I'll realize exactly what I've done and I'll smile. I walked out, closing the door behind me on Rachel's protests, Harper's sobs, and Milo's confused questions. The morning air was crisp and cool. Birds were still chirping. The sun was still shining, and I felt lighter than I had in 2 years. The silent treatment began approximately 30 seconds after I left for work that Thursday morning. And let me tell you, it was glorious. I'm talking pure uninterrupted blessed silence. The kind of peace that monks spend decades meditating to achieve, and I got it for free just by canceling a tuition payment. If I'd known silence was this easy to obtain, I would have done it 2 years ago. Day 1 was the best. I came home from work around 6, my time, 2. Maybe stopped at Target to browse the tools section for 20 minutes even though I didn't need tools, just to extend my freedom, and walked into a house that felt like a library after closing. Rachel was in the kitchen aggressively making a smoothie. And when I say aggressively, I mean she was throwing kale into the blender like it had personally offended her entire bloodline. Bananas were being peeled with the violence of someone defusing a bomb. The blender roared to life with a sound that suggested it was also angry and perhaps questioning its life choices. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my existence, just made her angry smoothie, which was probably some combination of spinach, protein powder, and pure rage. Poured it into one of her collection of motivational tumblers. This one said she believed she could, so she did, which felt ironic given the current situation, and stormed upstairs. Her footsteps were so heavy. I'm pretty sure our downstairs neighbors felt them. Except we didn't have downstairs neighbors because we lived in a single-family home. But if we did, they would have filed a noise complaint. Harper was camped out on the couch in full sulk mode, wrapped in a blanket like a burrito of teenage despair. Her hair was in a messy bun that actually was messy, not the Instagram kind, and she was scrolling through her phone with the enthusiasm of someone reading their own obituary. Every few minutes, she'd sigh dramatically, like Broadway-level dramatic. The kind of sigh that deserved its own sound effect and maybe a spotlight. I walked past her to grab a beer from the fridge. "Hey Harper, how was your day?" "Nothing." Not even an eye roll. Just pure concentrated ignore mode. She scrolled harder on her phone, if that was even possible. Her thumb was moving so fast I was worried she'd sprain it. Cool, I said to absolutely no one. My day was great. Thanks for asking. Had a really productive meeting about network security. Bob from accounting brought donuts. It was a whole thing. More silence. I popped open my beer and headed to my closet office or my dying plant, and I could contemplate our lives in peace. The plant was looking slightly better. Actually, I'd been watering it more consistently lately. Turns out when you're not emotionally exhausted from family drama, you have energy for things like basic plant care. Who knew? Day 2 followed the same pattern, except Rachel had upgraded from angry smoothies to angry meal prep. I came home to find her in the kitchen surrounded by about 47 Tupperware containers, violently chopping vegetables like they were photos of my face. The knife was hitting the cutting board with such force I was genuinely concerned for the structural integrity of our countertop. Milo was at the dining table, unusually quiet, doing homework, actual homework, without being asked, without complaining. Without making sound effects or throwing things or acting like sitting still was a form of torture. He was just sitting there writing things, looking almost studious. I stood in the doorway for a second, making sure I wasn't hallucinating. "Milo, you good, buddy?" He glanced up at me, something different in his eyes. Not quite fear, not quite respect, but definitely not the smug confidence he'd had before. More like uncertainty, like he was recalculating his entire understanding of how the world worked and coming up with numbers that didn't add up the way they used to. "Yeah," he said quietly, then went back to his homework. Rachel slammed a container shut so hard I thought the lid might achieve orbit. She grabbed her meal prep containers, all labeled with days of the week in her perfect handwriting, and started loading them into the fridge with the efficiency of someone who was channeling all their emotions into food organization. I grabbed some leftover pizza from the fridge, cold pizza, breakfast of champions, and divorced dads, which I wasn't yet, but could see on the horizon, and retreated back to my office. The silence followed me like a comfortable shadow. I hadn't seen this much peace since our honeymoon in Costa Rica. Back in those blissful 5 days before Rachel got food poisoning and blamed me for suggesting we try that beachside ceviche stand, turning our romantic getaway into what I could only describe as a hostage situation with better weather. Day 3 was when things started getting weird. Not bad weird, just different weird. Harper actually came out of her blanket cocoon and took a shower. Like a real shower, not the 30-second and rinse she usually did while scrolling through TikTok. Rachel stopped making angry smoothies and angry meal prep and just made regular smoothies, regular food. Still didn't talk to me, but her movements had less "I'm imagining this is your face" energy and more "I'm tired and confused" energy. Milo asked me to help him with his math homework. Let me repeat that because it's important. Milo asked me for help. I was in the living room pretending to watch TV, but actually just enjoying the quiet when he shuffled over with his textbook. And this look on his face like he was approaching a wild animal he wasn't sure was friendly. Can you? He started, then stopped, then started again. Can you help me with fractions? I looked at him. He looked at me. Rachel was watching from the kitchen, her smoothie frozen halfway to her mouth. Harper had her phone pointed in our direction, probably live streaming this unprecedented moment of a stepchild acknowledging my existence. Sure, I said, patting the couch next to me. Let's see what you're working on. He sat down, not right next to me, but closer than he'd ever voluntarily been, and opened his book. We worked through 3 problems together. He actually listened, actually asked questions, actually said, thank you. When we finished, Rachel's smoothie remained frozen in midair. That night, I heard her on the phone with her mother. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, okay? I was totally trying to eavesdrop. I was standing outside our bedroom door like a creep. But in my defense, I was a creep who just nuked his family's entire educational arrangement and wanted to know what the fallout assessment was looking like. I don't know, Mom, Rachel was saying, her voice tired and small in a way I hadn't heard in years. We enrolled them in Jefferson Public. It's not the same. Harper's devastated. Milo's confused. And she paused. I could picture her sitting on our bed, probably staring at her phone or her reflection or some combination of both. He won't even fight with me. He's just calm. And somehow that's worse. Brenda's response was muffled, but I caught the words divorce and lawyer and show him. I don't think that's Rachel started, then trailed off. More silence. Then maybe I didn't realize what he was actually contributing. Maybe I thought it was just supposed to happen, like it was automatic progress. Small, glacial, possibly imaginary progress, but progress nonetheless. Day 4, Friday, the end of the most peaceful work week I'd had in 2 years. I came home to find Rachel sitting at the kitchen table alone. No smoothie, no phone, no meal prep, just sitting there looking deflated like someone had let all the air out of her influencer dreams and left her with just regular reality. We enrolled them in public school, she said without preamble, without looking at me. Her voice was flat, defeated. Jefferson Middle and Jefferson High. They start Monday. It's not the same. I set down my briefcase, loosened my tie, and pulled out a chair across from her. We sat in silence for a moment. The kitchen clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, all the normal sounds of a house that was trying to figure out if it was still a home. No, I agreed, keeping my voice gentle because even though I'd orchestrated this whole thing, I wasn't a monster. I was just a guy who'd reached his limit. No marble hallways, but maybe they'll learn something marble can't buy. She looked up at me then, her eyes red-rimmed, her face free of makeup for maybe the first time since I'd known her. Like what? Manners, I said simply. Respect. How to treat people who care about them. How to say thank you. How to exist in the world without expecting everything to be handed to them on a silver platter with a side of entitlement. She didn't reply, didn't argue, didn't defend her kids or attack me or launch into one of her speeches about how I didn't understand parenting. She just sighed, not dramatically like Harper, but deeply like someone who'd been holding their breath for 2 years and finally exhaled. I didn't realize, she said quietly. Realize what? The difference between luxury and love. We sat there in the kitchen as the sun set outside, the light fading through the windows, and for the first time since that slap heard around the living room. I thought maybe, just maybe, something royal might actually grow here. Weeks passed, not in that dramatic movie montage kind of way, but in the slow, uncomfortable way that actual change happens. With awkward dinners, forced conversations, and everyone slowly figuring out who they were without the safety net of private school prestige, Milo adjusted faster than anyone expected. Turns out when you strip away the entitled environment and stick a kid in a place where nobody cares that his stepdad used to pay premium tuition, he actually becomes decent. He started drawing, like really drawing, not just doodling on his iPad, but actual pencil on paper art. He'd bring home sketches of superheroes and dragons and sometimes just random kids from his class. His teacher called to say he'd been helping other students with math. The same kid who'd slapped me was now saying please and thank you without being prompted. Miracles do happen. Apparently, Harper got humbled by life in a way that was honestly more effective than any punishment I could have designed. Public school didn't care about her Instagram aesthetic or her influencer dreams. Nobody was impressed by her designer clothes. She came home after the first week looking shell-shocked like she discovered gravity was real. But slowly, painfully slowly, she started changing, made actual friends instead of followers, joined the art club, started saying good morning to me without her phone in her hand. One Saturday afternoon, Milo came up to me while I was reading on the porch. He was holding a piece of paper folded carefully, looking nervous in that way kids do when they're about to do something vulnerable. I made you something, he said quietly, handing it over. I unfolded it. It was a drawing, him and me, sitting in a boat, fishing poles in hand. The sun was setting in the background, all oranges and purples that he'd colored carefully. Above it, in his wobbly handwriting, he'd written, "Me and Dad." Dad, not stepdad, just Dad. I didn't cry. Men don't cry. Our eyes just leak pride sometimes, and mine were definitely leaking as I pulled him into a hug. Rachel stood in the doorway watching us. She looked different now, softer, quieter, less concerned with how things looked and more concerned with how things felt. We've been talking more, actually talking, not just coordinating schedules. She'd apologized last week. A real apology, the kind that takes courage. "Thank you," she'd said, "for not giving up on us, for teaching them what I couldn't." Now I sit on this porch some mornings sipping coffee, watching the sunrise, and I smile. Because revenge doesn't always need fire and fury. Sometimes it just needs one canceled payment and a whole lot of patience. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones money can't buy. And sometimes, just sometimes, people actually learn them.